Hey there, welcome to another edition of Align and Refine. And today I will be going over different ways to come into pigeon pose. Now, there is a modified version of pigeon which is called Zsit, like the letter Z. I'll be going over that first. And that's something that you may want to consider if your hips are really tight. As I always say, so you'll hear me say this quite often, but it's a really important point to remember that when the hips are tight, if you come into pigeon pose in a very specific way, which I'll show you the do's and the don'ts when we come into it in a typical way that you may be used to if you are a yoga practitioner from down dog. So Z-sit is from seated, down dog will be the way you come into it that you are probably used to. But let's just see if we can have a couple different ways of getting into it today. Okay, so Z-sit, we start seated. I'm going to place both feet flat on the mat, knees up toward the ceiling. Now, you would be better off not sitting up on something here. You just want to just be sitting on your mat so that you have the ability to move around. So you want to bring your right knee down toward the floor, so right leg down toward the floor, left knee behind left heel. Okay, so your legs look like a bit of a Z here, right? First stage, turn your torso over toward the right. Hands are framing the right knee. And then you can walk your hands forward and maybe your forearms come down onto the floor. Now, my right hip is down on the floor. My forearms are on the floor. And if you are tight, this is going to be pretty extreme. You're going to feel a lot of sensation. I shouldn't say extremes. I don't want to scare you, but it's going to be a lot of sensation. So you can get a nice deep stretch here. So please, if you're feeling a deep stretch here, then just stay here, get a nice stretch while I go through the rest of the options, okay? Second option for Z-sit is to walk the hands in toward the body. Your legs stay the same, but you bring your torso forward. And then you place your hands to frame the front foot shin. And again, maybe you walk it forward and you place your forearms onto the floor or not. Doesn't have to happen. But either way, you just want to be facing forward. And this, because you have the body a little more forward and the hips on an angle, this gets even more extreme. So, I keep using that word extreme. I don't want to say extreme. It gives more sensation. So more sensation. Not always a bad thing as long as it's not in the joint. So if you feel it in the hip joint, in the bone, deep, deep, deep in your hip or in your knee, no good. You always want to feel it in the muscle area. So in the side of your hip, the glute area, tush area, that's good, okay? Now, to make this into a regular pigeon without going through the down dog place, and this is a good place you can try it out, and then you could always come back to Z-sit because you're not far from it. So how you do that, little maneuvering, but can be done. You walk the hands in toward the body, lift up off of the right sitting bone. Actually, I'm going to turn this way, so just so you can see it better. So if I was here, so I was like this, right, facing forward. So now I walk my hands into my body. I lift off the right sitting bone. I take a peek at my left leg and I send it back behind me. I just kind of scoot it over so that the hip, knee, and ankle are in the same alignment. Then I slide that leg back behind me a bit more and move my right knee behind my right wrist. Then from there, I can slide back a little bit more. Now my right hip is off the mat. And then my forearms can come down. Maybe, or maybe they don't. You can stay upright too. Just be mindful you're not leaning into the heel of your hand, that you shift the weight back and you sink into the hips, particularly the right hip, to get yourself in that action of hips moving down toward the floor. And that's how you'd come into your full expression of pigeon. And if, let's say, you came here and you said, this is way too much sensation, you would then drop down onto the right hip, bend through the left knee, and look, you're right back at the second stage of Z-sit. Then to come out, we would lift off of the right hip, and then we would just come back to, we would just release the knees back down to our regular position. So we'll do it again. So we were in pigeon, we lift up off, we're here, we release it down, and then we bend our back knee, and then we come to a seated position. You can extend the legs out, shake it out, shake, shake, shake. So that's how you'd come into it from for Z-sit, okay? If we're coming into it from downward facing dog, I want to show you a safer way to do that, okay? So now, from down dog, what happens a lot in the classes is the back leg, you lift the back leg and then you swing it forward, right? That looks familiar to some of you. I'm sure you're here and you swing it forward, you come into pigeon. The problem with that action is that when you do that, that swinging action is moving from the knee, not from the hip. So what I'm going to show you is a few more steps, but it puts you in proper alignment to be sure that your knee is protected, okay? It also makes it easier to feel it out first before you go into the full expression, and then decide if you should come into Z-sit or not from pigeon, okay? So, all right, so come to downward facing dog. So here are the stages. Lift the leg, point the toe, open the hip, bend the knee. Now here's where a lot of times you just swing the leg forward, but here's the extra step. Square off your hips, bring the knee towards your belly, and then place left knee behind left wrist. Take a peek back. Once again, slide the right leg back, hip, knee, ankle alignment. Leg likes to splay out to the side. Keep it nice and even. And then you're not dropping down. When you're in pigeon, this hip is lifted, or you can put a block or a blanket there if it's really lifted. A little extra tip here is if you bring your right hip back toward the wall behind you and up slightly toward the ceiling, the back leg comes forward and slightly down toward the floor. It's going to really square off your hips. And then your forearms can come down, and now you're in the full expression of of pigeon. If you find that this is just too intense for you, again, you're not far away from Z-sit. You just drop down onto this left sitting bone, bend through the right knee, and there you are once again in Z-sit. So knowing about Z-sit is a nice way to work with this pose and also be able to move gradually into it. It's a really great pose to do. And if you do it this way, you can do it cold, meaning that you can just do it pretty early on in your sequence, or just come right into it and do the hip opener. All right, so this way you have that option as well. So if that was helpful, namaste.